I and my boyfriend have been dating for 3 years after we met volunteering during the floods. Dan and I have lived together for most of that time, and things have generally been pretty good between us, or so I thought. I'm currently in law school, while also working part-time at a local firm. We live in an apartment within walking distance of my school and work, which is important since I don't have a car. Despite my schedule, I end up handling most of the household stuff: cooking, cleaning, laundry. Dan works from home in IT with a flexible schedule, but loading the dishwasher is beyond his capabilities. I've stuck with this arrangement partly because I care about Dan, but also because he helped me when my mom was hospitalized with pneumonia early in our relationship. He helped me financially and emotionally during that time, and I'll always be grateful for that. I missed a bunch of classes to be at the hospital, and Dan would bring me food, help me study, and even covered some of my bills when I had to reduce my work hours. It was a side of him that made me fall in love with him. After 3 years together, I finally met Dan's parents this weekend when they drove 4 hours to visit us. His mom, Claire, insisted on staying at our apartment rather than getting a hotel, which was stressful given how small our place is and how behind I was on cleaning with midterms happening. But I wanted to make a good impression, so I cleaned and tried to be the perfect hostess. The first night, we went out to dinner at a local restaurant, as I was dreading cooking for everyone. Things started off okay, with general small talk and getting to know you questions. Then, Claire started asking about my domestic skills. Yes, she actually used that phrase. She wanted to know if I cook elaborate meals for Dan, if I've learned to sew and mend his clothes. I politely explained that between law school and my job, I handle basic cooking and cleaning, but we often get takeout on busy nights. Claire pursed her lips at this. Then she asked about my long-term plans and seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned finishing law school and eventually joining a firm specializing in environmental law. What happened next has me confused. Claire put down her fork, looked me straight in the eye, and said that a career girl isn't what her son needs. She suggested that I should consider being a stay-at-home girlfriend to support Dan's career instead. I was stunned, but tried to respectfully disagree, explaining that I'm passionate about becoming a lawyer and that this has been my dream for years. Claire then turned to Dan and said, "Honey, you deserve someone who will put your needs first, not her career." I waited for Dan to defend me, to say literally anything in support of my ambitions. Instead, he nodded along with his mother and said, "I do feel like I come second sometimes with all her studying." I felt like I'd been slapped. I excused myself to the bathroom and wondered if I'd somehow misheard or misunderstood the whole conversation. When I came back to the table, Claire had moved on to talking about a family friend's daughter who dropped out of college when she found a good man. The rest of dinner was awkward, but I managed to keep it together. When we got home, I tried to talk to Dan about what happened, but he completely dismissed my concerns. He said his mom means well, and that maybe she had some valid points about balance in relationships. I was too exhausted to argue and just went to bed. The next morning was worse. I overheard Dan on the phone with his mother. He was agreeing that I might be too focused on my own goals and that he's not sure if I'm right for the family. I pretended to be asleep when he came back to the bedroom, but I've been walking around ever since. This feels unexpected. I knew Dan was traditional in some ways, but I thought he supported my career goals. We've talked about my law school ambitions since day one, and he's never indicated he had a problem with it before. Now I'm wondering if he's just been waiting before settling down to be the supportive girlfriend his mother envisions. What makes this harder is that I handle most of the domestic stuff despite my schedule. I cook, I clean, I do laundry, all while maintaining good grades and working part-time. Meanwhile, Dan works from home and still can't find time to unload the dishwasher or do a load of laundry. The imbalance has always bothered me, but I told myself it was temporary while I'm in school. Looking back, there were probably signs I ignored. When I first applied to law school, Dan made comments about how expensive it was and how long it would take. I thought he was just being practical, but maybe he was hoping I'd choose something less demanding. When I got accepted, he was happy for me, but not as enthusiastic as my friends and family. I chalked it up to him not being an emotional person, but now I'm second-guessing everything. I'm also thinking about all the little comments Dan has made over the past 3 years. The sighs when I say I need to study, the complaints about takeout food, The way he schedules gaming sessions during times when he knows I'll be home studying and then gets annoyed when I don't pay attention to him. It's not like I haven't tried to involve Dan in my law school journey. I've invited him to networking events and tried to talk to him about cases I find interesting, but he always seems to change the subject. I thought he was just not interested in legal stuff. But maybe it's that he's not interested in me having a demanding career at all. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting. Maybe Claire just comes on strong and Dan was trying to keep the peace. But another part of me thinks this might be a fundamental incompatibility I've been ignoring. I always assumed we were building a life where both our careers mattered, but now I'm not so sure that's what Dan wants. I'm in the middle of midterms. I have a paper due next week, and I just found out I'm being considered for a summer internship. I can't afford to be distracted by relationship drama right now, but I also can't stop thinking about it. I am upset about how supportive Dan was when my mom was sick. He helped me through a difficult time, and I'll always be grateful for that. Does that mean I owe it to him to be the kind of partner his family wants me to be, even if it means giving up my own dreams? I feel like I'm being pressured for having ambitions beyond being someone's girlfriend. Or am I right to be concerned that after 3 years together, he's suddenly revealing expectations that completely conflict with the future I've been working toward? Is this who he's always been, and I've just been too busy or naive to notice? Claire and Dan's dad are staying for 2 more days, and the tension in our apartment is unbearable. Claire keeps making these little comments about my interesting career choice and asking if I've thought about what Dan said. Meanwhile, Dan is acting like nothing happened and getting annoyed when I don't play along with the happy family. I've tried talking to people close to me, but they're all taking sides about whether I should prioritize my relationship or my career, and it's making everything worse. I just need some objective perspectives on whether I'm overreacting or if this is actually a major red flag I shouldn't ignore. Now for the first update. Well, it's been a wild ride since my last post about Dan and his mom's traditional expectations for me. And wow, thank you all for the responses. I literally spent hours reading through everything. As many of you guessed, things have only gotten more complicated, and I definitely need to share what's been happening. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Seriously, I was not expecting thousands of responses. Your insights gave me clarity when I felt confused. After reading your comments, I started paying closer attention to Dan's behavior and reflecting on our relationship history. Turns out there were way more red flags than I initially realized. For the past few days, while his parents were still visiting, I found myself hyper-aware of every interaction between Dan and me. The more I observed, the more I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing with his mom. Dan has been subtly undermining my educational pursuits for a while now, like how he always manages to schedule his gaming sessions during my study blocks and gets irritated when I don't pay attention to him, or how he forgets to handle any household tasks when I have important assignments due. When his parents finally left on Tuesday, I decided we needed to have a serious talk. I waited until after dinner, which I cooked, of course, and brought up how hurt I felt when he didn't defend my career goals to his mother. He started with what seemed like an apology, saying, "I'm sorry you felt unsupported," but then quickly pivoted to suggesting that maybe, just maybe, I could scale back my ambitions a bit. He suggested that perhaps I could pursue paralegal work instead of becoming a full attorney, since it would be less stressful for both of us. Both of us? I'm the one doing all the work here. I was about to respond when my phone rang. It was the head of the environmental law department from my school. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Good thing I did, because I found out I'd been selected for that prestigious summer internship at the environmental law firm in the state capital. The one I mentioned applying for, but didn't think I'd actually get because they usually take third-year students. When I hung up, I was very excited. This internship is huge for my career prospects, like game-changing huge. Instead of congratulating me, Dan immediately started focusing on logistical problems. How would I get there? It's an hour away. Who would handle apartment cleaning while I was commuting? What about meal prep? I wish I was exaggerating this, but these were his actual concerns. I suggested that maybe, just maybe, he could take on more household responsibilities during my internship, since he, works from home, and has a flexible schedule. He got frustrated and said his job is mentally demanding, even though I've literally seen him play video games during work hours multiple times. The argument escalated when he casually mentioned he'd already told his mother about the internship opportunity. Not only had he told her before we'd even fully discussed it, but she was apparently coming back that weekend to help us figure things out. Help us? More like help him convince me to turn it down. I firmly told him that this was my decision to make and that his mother had absolutely no role in it. That's when he accused me of being selfish and ungrateful for everything he's done for me. He actually said, "I was there for you when you needed me, but you can't do this one thing for me," referring to when he supported me during my mom's illness. To answer the top questions from last time, 1. Yes, my mom is fully recovered now. Thank you for asking. 2. Dan has never explicitly said he expected me to drop out of law school before this. 3. We've been together for exactly 3 years and 2 months. 4. Yes, I'm on the lease and contribute 60% of the rent. I was absolutely stunned that he viewed our relationship in such transactional terms. I pointed out that partners should support each other's growth without keeping score, and that I've been supporting his career by handling most household responsibilities despite my much busier schedule. He didn't like that at all. He grabbed his keys and stormed out of the apartment, claiming I value my career ambitions over our relationship. While he was gone, I noticed his laptop was still open. I'm not proud of this part, and I know many of you will call me out for it, but I glanced at his screen and saw he'd been messaging his mother throughout our entire argument. The messages showed Claire suggesting she drive up immediately to talk some sense into that girl. That girl, not even using my name. Edit. To clarify, I didn't go through his computer looking for messages. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter with the messages visible on screen. I know some people think I invaded his privacy, but I literally just saw what was already displayed. I've never gone through his personal stuff before this. I immediately called my best friend Mia, who offered her couch as a temporary place to stay while I figure things out. The only downside is it would mean a 45-minute bus ride to campus each day, compared to my current 10-minute walk. But at this point, I'm seriously considering it. That night, while Dan was still out, presumably at a friend's place, he didn't come home until the next morning, I started researching alternative housing options. Housing in our small college town is extremely limited and expensive, especially mid-semester when most leases are already signed. Student housing is full, and the few available apartments within my budget are at least a 30-minute bus ride from campus. The internship starts in 6 weeks, right after finals, and I'd need to commute to the state capital daily unless I can find temporary housing there, which would mean paying double rent, something I absolutely cannot afford right now. Some quick math shows I'd be spending nearly 3 hours daily just commuting if I keep our current apartment. As many of you suggested in my last post, I should check what breaking the lease would cost. It's 3 months' rent as penalty, which is about $3,600 I definitely don't have lying around. I feel stuck between pursuing this career opportunity and maintaining basic stability. Dan returned the next morning acting like nothing major happened. He made coffee and asked if I felt better after sleeping on it, as if I was just being emotional rather than making a legitimate life decision. Several of you mentioned looking deeper into Dan's past relationships for patterns, and when I casually brought up his ex-girlfriend, who apparently left graduate school to take a job in his city, he said she made the smart choice prioritizing what matters. That comment told me everything I needed to know. Now, I'm faced with an impossible choice. Take the internship and figure out the housing situation later, potentially risking financial security, or turn down a career-defining opportunity to maintain peace in a relationship that suddenly feels built on completely different expectations than I thought. I still don't know what I'm going to do, but reading your comments and advice has made me feel less alone in this whole mess. I'll update again once I've made some decisions about the internship and living situation, and after I've had what I'm sure will be a delightful conversation with Claire this weekend. Wish me luck. Now for the second update. Update 2. I wish I had better news to share, but things with Dan and his mom have gotten more complicated since my last update. Thanks to everyone who's been following this mess of a situation and for all the advice and support. It's been 2 weeks since that argument with Dan about the internship, and I've been living in a weird emotional limbo. After a lot of back and forth, and reading through hundreds of your comments, I decided to accept the internship despite Dan's objections. I mean, turning down a career-defining opportunity to appease my boyfriend's mom's traditional expectations. Yeah, no thanks. Living in our apartment has been tense, to say the least. Dan's been alternating between giving me the cold shoulder and making weird attempts at reconciliation. Like yesterday, he surprised me by cooking dinner, which momentarily made me think he was coming around. Then I saw the text notification pop up on his phone, a message from his mom with the recipe she'd sent him to show her what she'll be missing. Cool, super normal and not manipulative at all. I've quietly started moving my most important possessions to Mia's apartment. Nothing major yet, don't want to trigger a confrontation. Just irreplaceable stuff like my grandmother's jewelry, important documents, and the external hard drive with all my law school notes and papers. Better safe than sorry, right? I also spoke with my academic advisor about housing options near the internship location. She was incredibly helpful and put me in touch with another student who completed the same internship last summer. Turns out there's affordable short-term housing available specifically for interns, but I'd need to apply like yesterday, so I did. Just having a backup plan has reduced my anxiety by about 50%. A quick note, many commenters pointed out that Dan's behavior shows classic signs of someone who was raised by a controlling parent and never developed proper boundaries. You were spot on. The more I observe their interactions, the more I see how Claire manipulates him and how he seeks her approval in ways that aren't healthy for a grown man. The situation reached a breaking point 3 days ago when I received an email from Claire. Yes, an actual email from my boyfriend's mom. If that doesn't scream boundary issues, I don't know what does. Dan had apparently given her my email address without asking me. The subject line was, "Reasonable compromises for your relationship success." I wish I was making this up. The email outlined her suggestions for how Dan and I could move forward harmoniously, which included me. 1. Reducing my course load to part-time. 2. Handling all household duties to support Dan's career growth. And 3. Reconsidering the internship opportunity in favor of local options. She even offered to help me find suitable paralegal positions that would be less demanding on our family dynamics. I had to reread that part several times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. When Dan got home that evening, I asked him point blank why he gave his mother my email address without my permission. His response, "I was just trying to find a solution, and Mom has experience making relationships work." Translation, Mom has experience making men happy by ensuring women comply with traditional gender roles. Then yesterday, things went from bad to worse. I came home from classes, exhausted after a brutal contracts law review session, to find Claire sitting in our living room. Dan wasn't even home. He was at a rare in-office workday that his company requires once a month. She had her own key to our apartment that Dan had given her, without telling me. "I thought we should have a woman-to-woman talk," she said. "I'm concerned about the direction of your relationship with my son." Instead of immediately losing it, which, honestly, would have been justified, I decided to try a different approach. I calmly asked her what specific concerns she had. This seemed to throw her off balance for a moment. She probably expected me to get defensive right away. She recovered quickly, though, explaining that Dan needs stability and support, and that my career obsession was making him anxious and affecting his work performance. I almost laughed out loud at that one. Dan's work performance issues probably have more to do with his gaming sessions that regularly extend until 3 a.m. rather than my studying. When I pointed this out, Claire dismissed it as how men decompress, and that a supportive partner would understand that. For those keeping score at home, woman studying to build career equals selfish. Man gaming until 3 a.m. instead of working equals just needs to decompress. Make it make sense. The conversation took a disturbing turn when Claire pulled out her iPad and showed me local apartment listings she'd been looking at. Suitable for a single young man, she said. She had already put down a deposit on one for Dan, assuming I would be the one moving out. I was completely blindsided. This wasn't just casual interference anymore. She was actively orchestrating our breakup. "Dan deserves someone who puts him first," she said. "I thought it would be easier for everyone if I handled the logistics." That's when it hit me. She was talking as if she was helping us separate amicably, but Dan had no idea she was doing this. She was planning to orchestrate our entire breakup and then blame it entirely on my career prioritization. When I asked if Dan knew about these plans, Claire smiled. He'll understand it's for the best once you're gone. He's always listened to his mother's advice in the end. This woman wasn't just overstepping boundaries. She was pushing through them with confidence. I asked her to leave immediately, stating we had nothing further to discuss. She gathered her things but paused at the door. "Don't worry about the lease. Our family lawyer will handle everything." After she left, I sat on the couch trying to process what had just happened. I was angry, yes, but also weirdly relieved. At least now I knew what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a boyfriend's mom with traditional values. This was someone actively trying to control her adult son's life and relationships. When Dan returned home that evening, I told him about his mother's surprise visit. He didn't believe me at first. Classic. Until I showed him the apartment listing his mom had accidentally left behind. The brochure had her handwritten notes in the margins about proximity to his office and how it would be perfect for a fresh start. Edit 5:30 p.m. Just realized I forgot to mention something important. When Dan saw the apartment brochure, his reaction wasn't anger at his mom's interference. He wasn't outraged that she was planning our breakup behind his back. Instead, he looked confused and said, "But how would we handle breaking the lease? It would cost thousands." That was his primary concern, not the manipulation, not the boundary violation, not the fact that his mother was actively trying to end our relationship, but the logistics of the lease. That moment told me everything I needed to know about where his priorities lie. I spent the night at Mia's apartment, needing space to think. This morning, I woke up to 12 text messages from Dan, alternating between defending his mom, "She means well, she just worries about me," and asking when I'm coming home. Not once did he apologize for giving her a key without my knowledge or for sharing my email address with her. The internship starts in a month, and I'm now 100% certain I'm taking it. I've started looking into breaking the lease. There's a clause that allows early termination with 60 days notice, plus a penalty equal to 1 month's rent. It's going to be expensive, but my mom offered to help after I finally filled her in on everything that's been happening. She was not happy about how Dan and Claire have been treating me. I have a meeting with Student Legal Services tomorrow to review my options regarding the lease. I'm also planning to secure my position in that intern housing ASAP. As much as this situation hurts, and as much as I once loved Dan, I now see that our relationship has fundamentally different expectations at its core. No amount of compromise would bridge the gap between my career ambitions and the traditional wife role Claire, and apparently Dan, expect me to fill. This situation with Dan and his mom keeps getting more complicated by the day, and I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time. I'll update again once I've sorted out the housing situation and had what I'm sure will be a delightful final conversation with Dan. Now for the final update. Final update. Breaking up with my boyfriend after his mother tried to orchestrate our breakup. First, I want to thank everyone who's been following this saga and offering advice. Your support has genuinely kept me going through this mess. It's been 3 days since Claire's surprise ambush in our apartment, and I've been staying at Mia's place while trying to figure out my next steps. Dan has been blowing up my phone nonstop. He suddenly has all the time in the world to communicate. His messages have been this weird mix of half apologies for his mom's behavior, followed immediately by suggestions that maybe she had some valid concerns about our compatibility. My own mom called after I finally told her everything that's been happening. She was livid. She offered to help me financially if I need to break the lease, saying something that really hit home. Don't let gratitude keep you in a situation that's holding you back. That's when it clicked how much I've been letting past kindness excuse present disrespect. After 2 restless nights on Mia's futon, I decided it was time to rip off the Band-Aid. I texted Dan asking to meet at neutral ground. Before heading to the cafe, I made the mistake of checking social media. Claire was already posting photos of Dan with that family friend's daughter she mentioned at dinner. The photo was from yesterday, captioned, "Such a lovely afternoon with these two." The timestamp showed it was taken while Dan was sending me texts about working things out. I arrived at the cafe and ordered my usual iced coffee. When the door chimed 10 minutes later, I looked up, expecting just Dan. Instead, Dan, Claire, and his father walked in. My first instinct was to walk out immediately, but something kept me rooted to my seat. I decided to face whatever this was head on. Dan slid into the booth across from me looking uncomfortable, while his parents took the seats at the adjacent table, close enough to hear everything, but creating the illusion that this was still primarily between Dan and me. "I thought we were meeting to talk privately," I said, keeping my voice deliberately calm. "Why exactly are your parents here for what should be a conversation between partners?" Dan said. "I just wanted some support. They're trying to help find a solution that works for everyone." Before I could respond, Claire leaned over from her table and placed a folder on our table. "We thought it would be best to handle this efficiently," she said, sliding it toward me. Inside was what appeared to be a typed agreement stating that I would surrender claims to any shared property in exchange for Dan covering the lease breakage fee. They'd prepared a whole legal document. "You brought paperwork," I said, stating the obvious because I was honestly too shocked to form a more coherent thought. "Why would we need a written agreement rather than just talking things through?" Claire said, "We're just concerned you might try to take advantage of Dan financially given your legal background. We're protecting our son's interests." I repeated, "Take advantage financially. That's interesting considering I paid the security deposit and have covered most of our household expenses for the past year." Dan's father suddenly cleared his throat. The sound startled all three of us. "Claire, this isn't right. We shouldn't be here," he said, then turned to me. "I apologize for interfering in what should be between you and Dan." Claire said, "We are protecting our son, no longer bothering with the pleasant facade." "Actually," I said, "I brought some documentation of my own." I pulled out the spreadsheet showing our financial contributions to the household for the past year. I highlighted the totals showing I'd contributed 68% of our shared expenses, despite making significantly less than Dan. The cafe was quiet as they all looked at the numbers. I realized that he probably had no idea about the actual financial breakdown of our relationship. His mom's narrative about me being a financial burden made sense because he'd never bothered to check the facts. Dan looked at his parents, then back at me, and something in his expression shifted. For the first time in weeks, he seemed to be seeing the situation clearly. "Mom, Dad, can you give us a few minutes?" he said. It wasn't really a question. Claire started to protest, but Dan's father stood up and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Let's wait in the car, Claire." After a tense moment, she gathered her purse and the folder before following her husband out. Once they were gone, Dan and I sat in awkward silence. 3 years together, and suddenly we had nothing to say. "I'm sorry about that," he finally offered, gesturing vaguely toward the door where his parents had exited. "I didn't know they were going to bring paperwork." "But you knew they were coming to this meeting," I said. "Not a question." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I should go." And that was it. No dramatic declarations, no tearful goodbyes, just a quiet, deflated acknowledgement that whatever we had was over. He agreed to handle the lease himself since I would be moving for my internship, and we briefly discussed a schedule for me to collect the rest of my things when he wouldn't be home. We parted on terms that weren't friendly, but were at least respectful. As I watched him walk out to the parking lot where his parents waited, I felt an unexpected wave of pity. He was nearly 27 years old and still couldn't have a breakup conversation without his mother present. I spent the next week in a blur of activity, securing the intern housing, transferring utilities out of my name, and packing my belongings. Dan texted once asking if we could get coffee and talk, but I declined. Some conversations are better left unspoken. My law school friends organized a freedom party last weekend. Turns out that singing is surprisingly therapeutic. The most unexpected part of this whole ordeal was receiving a brief email from Dan's father. He apologized again for their intrusion and shared that he had spoken with Claire about appropriate boundaries. He also mentioned that Dan was doing some reflection and wished me success with my internship. It was oddly formal, but seemed sincere. My internship starts in 3 weeks, and I'm equal parts terrified and excited. The student housing is walking distance to the firm and includes utilities. Edit. A few people have asked about the other woman. I don't have any insider information, but according to mutual friends, Dan took her to dinner last week, and it apparently went so badly that he called a Uber home halfway through the meal. No details on what happened, but Claire hasn't posted any more photos of them together, so I'm guessing the matchmaking didn't take. Looking back, I realize how much I compromised my own values and ambitions to maintain a relationship that fundamentally couldn't support my growth. I kept thinking, if I just tried harder or explained better, Dan would understand why my career mattered to me. But you can't build understanding where there's no desire to understand. Life after Dan is surprisingly lighter than I expected. I'm sleeping better, studying more effectively, and actually looking forward to the future again.